Only 45% of students passed state exams during COVID year. That's the headline at the top of the front page of the leading newspaper in North Carolina's capital city. Joining us to take a look at the numbers tied to the latest school testing reports, Dr. Terry Stoops. He is director of the Center for Effective Education at the John Locke Foundation. And Terry, that headline screams out that students aren't doing so hot on these tests.
Yeah, this is really worrisome. What we saw between 2019 and 2021 was a 13.4% drop in the overall proficiency rates on state math, reading, and science tests. And we knew it was going to be bad. We didn't really know how bad it was going to be. And, these results suggest that we were right to be concerned about a test score drop during the COVID year. As many may recall, the testing for the 2019-20 school year was canceled.
Which is why you talk about 2019 and 2021 and skip 2020.
That's right. It's important to note that it wasn't canceled for the 2020-2021 school year, but there were aspects of the testing and accountability system that were waived by the federal government. So we're not going to see some of the measures and some of the types of data that we would normally produce of low-performing schools and school performance grades because we received a federal waiver. And I think the federal government recognized that a lot of states had challenges during that COVID year. Instruction was remote for some students, for nearly all students during one portion of the school year. And so that given the variations in instructional delivery during the 2020-2021 school year, that they were going to waive some of the federal requirements. But that doesn't mean that the state would give up on reporting the results. And so yesterday we finally got the results that we were much waiting for since the tests were administered in the spring.
Now, some people are going to look at this and say, wait a minute, we had these 2019 results that came out during what we could consider normal circumstances. The 2021 results are tied up in all of the mess that surrounded COVID-19. How can we accurately compare these numbers, and is there any good reason to try?
Yeah, there's definitely good reason to try, and there were differences between the school years, and they were meaningful differences. The way that students attended school, obviously, the way that teachers delivered instruction. I think it's important for us to get a realistic take on how students are performing, and that's what these test scores do, is give us a realistic picture, an imperfect picture, but a realistic picture of how students are performing in some of our core subjects. And as I said, it's an imperfect comparison. We had differences in participation rates is the one thing that I think is a valid concern with those who want to look at test scores from 2019 compared to 2021, because the participation rates in 2019 were over 95%, as is required by federal law. Those were waived in 2021, so we had some schools that had participation rates that were lower than 95%. That matters because we're not capturing as many students. So that's absolutely a valid concern with comparing one to the other. The other valid concern is that the testing window was different. In 2019, the testing window was pretty short. Schools were only given a couple weeks to complete the testing requirements, whereas in 2021, given the differences in the ways that students were attending school, there was a larger testing window. Some students took tests weeks after they completed the course. So there were those concerns. And again, the comparison is imperfect but necessary.
There's been a lot of talk ever since COVID-19 shut down the schools back in the spring of 2020 about learning loss. Do the numbers that we're seeing now tie in to this whole discussion of the long-term impact on learning loss?
Absolutely. And, we have some individuals, such as Tamika Walker-Kelly from the North Carolina Association of Educators. She called learning loss a false construct. And it's obviously not a false construct. It's real. The fact that students aren't keeping pace with where they normally would be in their academic career is absolutely worrisome. And here's why. Because we expect students to be at certain places at certain times in their academic career. And when they don't meet those expectations, it means that they fall further behind. It not only produces academic issues when they're in school, but there are economic and skill issues after they leave school. So we will be presumably graduating individuals with fewer skills that aren't where their peers were when they graduated, and so we have concerns about whether they will have the skills necessary to be successful in the workforce. We have some estimates that economists have produced about the long-term economic consequences of students losing essentially a school year and a half due to COVID, and they're astronomical, in the billions and billions of dollars in economic losses due to that learning loss. So pretending that it doesn't exist, or pretending that it won't matter for the long-term health of North Carolina's economy and our workforce, I think is a true mistake, and is truly misguided when you think about how important it is for our education system to ensure that we graduate individuals with the skills and knowledge necessary to be successful in our economy.
We have some numbers, but as you mentioned earlier, we don't have all numbers, including the numbers about schools and how well they're doing. How do educators use this information now moving forward as this new school year starts? Are they going to be able to have the tools they need to help the students get back on track?
That's really the primary reason why we really needed to have these test scores, is to see which students are struggling the most. If you look at the demographic breakdown of how students performed, you find that some populations performed worse than others. No population was left unscathed during the pandemic, and so there will be individuals that will require much more remedial work than others, and teachers who are able to identify who those students are and be able to give them the type of remedial work that they need in order to catch up, I think will be absolutely critical during this school year. The thing that we really have to worry about is whether students will go back to remote learning. We already know that there are some schools that have chosen to go back to remote learning environment. We know that other schools are considering doing so for fear of the Delta variant and the spread of COVID within their schools. And so if we find that school districts are moved back to remote learning, then the consequences will be absolutely horrifying for North Carolina, and we'll be in a position, and teachers will be in the most difficult position of not only looking to see which students fell behind last year, but which students are falling behind this year. And so the teachers really have their work cut out for them, and I think if they focus on the students that need the most help, I think we'll be in a much better place as a state. But this is a multi-year process, and it's a process that requires not just public institutions, but it requires private and nonprofit institutions and families and communities to come together, a sort of all-hands-on-deck approach to making sure that our students are where they're at and need to be academically.
The headline, once again, only 45% of students passed state exams during COVID year. For analysis of all of the numbers, including projections about what needs to be done moving forward, you will want to log on to johnlocke.org and look for the work of Dr. Terry Stoops. He is director of the Center for Effective Education. Thanks so much.
Thank you.